welcome back to the Pitwall Pod, your go-to F1 podcast where the desert heat meets the hottest drama on the grid. Today, we're diving straight into the Qatar Grand Prix, a night race filled with blazing pace, strategic chaos, and more twists than a sandstorm. From shock qualifiers to last lap battles, we're breaking down everything you missed, everything you didn't expect, and everything fans can't stop talking about. Buckle up, the lights are out, and this episode is underway. Free practice 1. Let's jump into the only practice session of the Qatar Grand Prix weekend, and what a chaotic hour it was under the settling sun in Lusail. With this being the final sprint weekend of the season, drivers had just 1 hour to dial in their cars, and it showed. Everyone rolled out on hard tires, and grip was not anyone's friend. Early on, we saw the timesheets shuffle like crazy. Russell, Verstappen, even Hulkenberg had a moment at the top, as drivers wrestled their cars through breezy conditions and a super smooth track. Max briefly went 8 tenths clear before reporting issues with his front left tire and later complaining about his steering problems. And he wasn't alone. Charles Leclerc echoed the same concerns, hovering down in P15 before he recovered to P6. Meanwhile, McLaren they spent most of the session looking lost. Norris was dead last halfway through, and Piastri wasn't much better. But once they switched focus away from hard tire struggle, the Papaya boys came alive. Rookie Isaac Hadjar was the first brave soul to bolt on the softs with 10 minutes to go, immediately going fastest. That opened the floodgates. Suddenly everyone was improving, and the timing tower lit up purple. Finally, McLaren showed their hand. Norris jumped to P1, only for Oscar Piastri to snatch it back with a 120.294. Just 500 split pair, giving McLaren surprise 1-2 after a pretty painful start to the session. Fernando Alonso slid into P3 for Aston Martin ahead of Carlos Sainz and Isaac Hadjar. Verstappen ended up P6, Albon 7, Leclerc 8, Stroll 9, and Antonelli rounded out the top 10. So after an hour of dust, clouds, complaints of no grip, tire headaches, and late session heroics, Oscar Piastri claimed the top spot heading into sprint qualifying. After a dramatic FP1, the pressure only ramped up under the Lusail floodlights as the grid went into sprint qualifying, and Oscar Piastri delivered when it mattered most. The Australian snatched a crucial sprint pole with a stunning 120.055, beating George Russell by just 300ths of a second. Piastri topped both of his flying laps in SQ3, cementing McLaren's strength on softs and putting himself in perfect position for Sunday's 19-lap charge. Lando Norris carrying a 24-point championship lead over both Piastri and Verstappen, and with a chance to steal his first world title this weekend, had the pace but not the execution. He ran wide at the final corner on his last lap and had to settle for P3, 2 tenths off Piastri. Fernando Alonso continued his excellent form in Qatar, pitting Aston Martin into P4, while Yuki Tsunoda stunned many by out-qualifying his Red Bull teammates. Verstappen, wrestling with bouncing and lack of stability, could only manage P6. Behind them, the top 10 was rounded out by Kimi Antonelli, Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc, and Alex Albon, both Williams cars impressively making it into SQ3. But the story of this qualifying wasn't just the front. Track limits became the villain once again, catching out Isaac Hadjar, Nico Hulkenberg, and others. Hadjar lost a lap good enough for SQ3 after running wide at turn 8, dropping him to P11. Hulkenberg also lost his best lap and ended P14. SQ1 delivered its own shock as Lance Stroll, Liam Lawson, and Lewis Hamilton were all eliminated early. Hamilton ended nearly 3 tenths of the cut, reporting over the radio that, quote, the car won't go any quicker. Behind him, the Alpines of Gasly and Colapinto locked out the final two spots on the grid. Verstappen, notable, was fastest in SQ1 and competitive in SQ2, but once the soft tires came out, McLaren turned up the heat. Piastri edged Norris by 400ths after the first lap, and Verstappen ran wide at turn 4 before complaining of bouncing yet again. On the final runs, Piastri improved, Russell got painfully close, Norris made a mistake, and Verstappen could only salvage 6th, setting up a fascinating dynamic for the sprint, with all three title contending teams jammed into the top 6. So your front row for Saturday, Piastri and Russell followed by Norris and Alonso, with Tsunoda and Verstappen making up row 3. Sprint. The Qatar sprint delivered drama from the very first lap, but in the end nobody had an answer for Oscar Piastri, who put on an absolutely dominant display under the Lusail lights. The McLaren driver launched perfectly from pole, controlled the race from the front, and never looked back, except perhaps in the final laps when tire drop-off hit and he had to manage carefully. Even then, he remained comfortable in command, taking victory by just under 5 seconds. George Russell held firm in P2, keeping Lando Norris behind him throughout the 19-lap run. Norris, who entered the weekend with a real chance to steal his maiden F1 title, simply didn't have the grip to take the fight to the Mercedes and had to settle for third. Behind them, Max Verstappen salvaged P4 after a tough 24 hours. The four-time champion continued to battle proposing and radio issues, complaining that the car was jumping again, the same problem that hampered him throughout Friday. He briefly threatened Norris but never got close enough to force a move. The real chaos was happening behind the four. Yuki Tsunoda crossed the line 5th, but only after serving a 5-second penalty for track limits. Kimi Antonelli initially benefited, moving up to P5 until he was handed an identical penalty for the same offense. In the end, Tsunoda kept the 4 points, Antonelli dropped to 6, and Fernando Alonso had Carlos Sainz round out the final points-paying positions. Further back, Ferrari endured another painful day. Charles Leclerc ran right on lap 1 and slipped into a DRS train, eventually finishing P13. Lewis Hamilton, who started from the pit lane after the team made setup changes, could only climb to P17. Neither Ferrari scored a sprint point. Isaac Hadjar, Alex Albon, Gabriel Bortoletti and Ollie Bearman all missed out as well, with Kick Sauber remaining the only team still without a sprint point this season. The race was largely defined by tire management and staying clean on the track, where running wide was almost unavoidable. A handful of drivers, including Tsunoda and Antonelli, Lawson and Alonso, all flirted with penalties as they fought grip, wind and dust. But up front it was Oscar Piastri, pole position, fast start, race control and maximum points, with Russell second and Norris third. The championship picture gets even tighter heading into the Grand Prix. Qualifying. Qatar delivered another huge twist in this three-way title fight. And once again, it was Oscar Piastri who rose to the occasion, less than 24 hours after storming the sprint victory. The Australian delivered a near-perfect lap to take a crucial pole position for Sunday's Grand Prix. It was McLaren versus McLaren at the top. Lando Norris set the early benchmark in Q3, looking sharp and in control. But after a short red flag delayed to clear debris on the circuit, the championship leader pushed just a little too hard. Norris ran wide at turn 2 on his final attempt, and that single moment opened the floor. Piastri walked right through it, delivering a stunning lap of 1:19.387. good enough for pole by just over a tenth. Norris starts second, knowing the maths is simple. Win the race and become a world champion for the first time. Max Verstappen made all three title contenders on the front three spots. The Dutchman just a tenth of a second off pole, but still battling the same bouncing issues that have plagued him all weekend. For Verstappen, the task is clear. He must finish ahead of Norris to keep the championship alive going into Abu Dhabi. Behind them, George Russell continued Mercedes' strong Qatar form in P4, followed closely by rookie Kimi Antonelli, who once again looked unfazed under pressure. Carlos Sainz put his Williams in sixth, with Fernando Alonso, Pierre Gasly, and Charles Leclerc rounding out the top 10. Leclerc only just scraping through after a dramatic high-speed spin earlier in the session. Further back, qualifying heartbreak struck for several big names. Yuki Tsunoda's sprint heroics were overshadowed by a Q1 exit. Esteban Ocon and Lance Stroll joined him on the sidelines, and Lewis Hamilton suffered a third consecutive early elimination, another bruising day for Ferrari. Nico Hulkenberg missed out on Q3 by just 0.003 of a second, while Alex Albon ended his afternoon under investigation for a pit lane incident. But at the front, the storyline is clear. Piastri on pole, Norris in second, Verstappen third. Three title contenders locked together for one of the most important starts of the season. Race on Sunday. What a race, what a twist, and what a final we now have on our hands. The Qatar Grand Prix delivered everything: a strategic chaos, title fight tension, and a result that blows the championship wide open and heading into Abu Dhabi. Max Verstappen did exactly what he needed to do: win, and he did it in a classic Verstappen fashion. Decisive at the start, relentless in the middle, and untouchable at the end. The race flipped on his head early when a safety car for the Hulkenberg-Gasly collision forced teams into an awkward pit window. McLaren gambled, staying out with Piastri and Norris. Red Bull didn't. That single strategic differences changed the shape of the Grand Prix. Verstappen's pace under alternated strategy and the mandatory 25-lap tire limit meant the McLarens were always fighting uphill. Oscar Piastri drove a brilliant race, matching Verstappen blow for much of the afternoon, but once the stops cycled through, he simply didn't have the track position to fight for the win. Still, P2 keeps him alive in the championship, just heading into the final. Carlos Sainz delivered one of the standout drives of the season for Williams, jumping Antonelli in the stops and holding off Norris for his second podium of the year. And that was the story for Lando Norris. A damage limitation afternoon, a rough start, a white moment at turn 14, and long painful stints stuck behind Sainz and Antonelli cost him dearly. He salvaged P4 on the penultimate lap, but his 22-point championship lead shrinks to just 12-1. One race left, two rivals breathing down his neck. Behind the front four, Kimi Antonelli kept Mercedes comfortable in the fight for P2 in the constructors. Russell recovered from the messy first lap to take P6. Alonso spun a full 360 and somehow continued, and Ferrari's day was unsurprisingly complicated. Leclerc took points in P9. Hamilton could only manage P12. Isaac Hadjar was set for another sensational P6 before the late puncture dropped him out of the top 10. Lawson and Tsunoda grabbed the final points. Stroll, Hadjar, Behrman, and Hulkenberg retired. But the headline is crystal clear. Verstappen wins, Piastri second, Norris only fourth, and that means the championship goes down to the wire in Abu Dhabi, with just 12 points of covering Lando Norris and Max Verstappen, and Piastri right behind, only 16 adrift. One race, three contenders, everything to play for. Drivers' Championship. Norris 408, Verstappen 396, Piastri 392, Russell 309, Leclerc 230. Constructors' Championship, McLaren 800, Mercedes 459, Red Bull 426, Ferrari 382, and Williams 137. And that wraps up our Qatar Grand Prix 2025 breakdown. The championship fight is officially red hot and there's no time to breathe. Everyone packs up and heads straight to Abu Dhabi, where from December 5th to 7th, the 2025 drivers' title will finally be decided. Norris, Verstappen, Piastri, two contenders, one last battle. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and drop a review. It helps the show more than you know. And don't forget to follow us so you never miss an episode, especially with the title decider just days away. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in Abu Dhabi, where champion will be crowned.